I know I'm trying to think of it as we go live. I mean, my rotation of my favorite hoodies.
Yeah, it's a very consistent rotation at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I still would love to get my favorite hoodie back, but Saud has that, so I'm just kidding.
I think Diego has that one, but either way,
man, Diego needs to give that back to me then. Yeah. Anyway,
next time we see him, you can skip for it. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's Wednesday, August 21st, and the main point of today's show was to be previewing the BCS Classic, which is going to be the next stop on our tour, the first stop that we had planned following the 2024 CrossFit Games, and give you guys just a little preview of what you can expect from us and from that competition in general. Clearly, there was something that happened in the CrossFit space last night that is, a very popular topic, a very passionate topic for a lot of people, and we will talk about it, but we're going to do that at the end. We want to kind of stick to the agenda that we kind of had planned for today, which is focus a little bit around competition, and then we'll talk about what the PFAA released last night and kind of the state of everything that's there. However, before any of that, we did want to take the start of the show to acknowledge that today is the date of Lazar Ðukić's funeral, and we saw this post from his coach. I don't actually think that a ton of people realize that he was not being coached by Facundo this past year for the 2024 season following basically Dubai. He went back to his coaches with ATP Lab. And Panag is kind of what they called him. As you can see his full name there, Panagiolis, was the primary coach, but there were a team of coaches coaching Lazar from ATP. They were his coaches prior to that. And they were there obviously at the games with him. They were in the water searching for him. And I just think that's kind of been missed. And so I thought said perfectly here, rest in peace, champ. So we're just going to take a few moments silence to think about and be with the people who are in Serbia and were able to attend the funeral today. Rest in peace, Lazar. And as everyone has said, and will continue to say, we will always appreciate the time we had with you, and we'll always will miss you. Okay. So I see, I know that there are people here that want to talk about the PFAA thing, which is totally fine.
Let me do it.
Okay, you do it. You do.
That's why I'm here. I have one job, and you're going to take it from me.
Which is understandable, and we do want to talk about it too. But I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm gonna start going back on the road. It's going to be a pretty busy competition season over the next month or two, and starting with BCS Classic, which is a competition that is getting ready to take place for the 15th time. I believe 2010 was their first iteration, and they'll have a 2-day competition. It's really a Friday afternoon and evening, and then Saturday full day type of a thing, and the whole thing finishes by 6 o'clock or so on Saturday night. And that's impressive because there are over 1,100 total athletes registered for this competition. Now it's teams of 2. There's scaled masters, intermediate masters, RX, and elite divisions for male, female, and male pairs. On Friday, they have one field of play. They have a Friday Night Lights event called Dead Muscles, and I'm going to stream as many divisions as I can, as many heats of that as I can that night. It's CrossFit's giving you a hard time for some college football stuff. So that's what I'm going to do on Friday because it's just one field of play. The way that they're able to get that many athletes and through enough workouts to kind of have a well-rounded competition on Saturday is because there are 3 different fields of play, all three of those fields of play will run one workout throughout the entire day. So the divisions will rotate and everyone will get to compete once on each of those three stages on Saturday. So that's kind of cool. It's in College Station, or Bryan, Texas. I think it's always been there. And Charlie Lima, who we did have on maybe a month or two ago, is a competition organizer. He's also competing with Rory McKernan. Rich Froning and Angela DeChico will compete this year. And Mayhem has been closely involved with BCS Classic through Mayhem Missions. BCS Classic has always kind of had a fundraising and giving back sort of mentality to it. They work with the Ronald McDonald House and also Mayhem Missions. And, they'll be there again this weekend. So there's not necessarily a ton of athletes of the big names and high caliber that you guys will recognize. And that happens at a lot of the competitions we go to, where there are some, and then there's these massive communities that are competing. And it's one of the primary reasons that I like going on the road and covering these things, is because through the lens of following the elite, we can also recognize that there's these huge communities that are participating in CrossFit competitions or fitness competitions. And I think that that's important. I think that, in the context of what we're going to talk about later with the PFAA and Dave Castro and CrossFit as a business, it's important to recognize that, through the development of this thing over the last 20 years, there's been more and more opportunities for people to compete in a CrossFit event and a CrossFit competition in their local gym, in their local town, in their state, in their country, or whatever. And I think that's a super positive thing. I think that having the opportunity to do those things, put that on the calendar, encourages people to make good decisions in the preparation for that. And a lot of times those good decisions turn into habits that lead to better, healthier lifestyles. So we'll be following the RX Masters and RX divisions on Saturday, because can't stream three fields of play on my own. So everyone hopefully will get I'll have to take some small breaks to change equipment and stuff like this. It's just me, but we'll stream as much as we can Friday, and then follow the top divisions of Masters and Elite competitors on Saturday.
Yeah, a couple workouts been released, right? So looks like we have Event 2 Twinsies, RX 120 total bars or max total bars in 5 sets, 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, of 12 synchro burpee box jump overs, and max reps synchro toes a ball.
Yeah, and I think there's and a lot of the workouts are fairly similar. I think that it's actually if you're running competitions, you can learn a lot from someone who's ran 15 or is in their 15th year of running a competition. And if you just look at these workouts, and you'll be able to see them this weekend if you want, that they're simple. There's not a lot of equipment needed. It's one setup. They run that stage the whole day. And we've seen iterations of this at Wodapalooza in the past, where they'll have an event that's rowing, and it just stays on that. The rowers just stay there, and everyone cycles through and does that rowing event that day. They're great. They're good tests. They're good workouts, but they're also easy on the competition team, easy on the equipment team. And if you're watching, a few different divisions there, the changes to the workouts aren't very drastic. Maybe you change the weights or the reps, or maybe from a pull up to a chest bar pull up to a bar muscle up type of a thing. But it's a very similar flow all throughout the day, which helps also with when you're talking about judges and volunteers that need to be a part of that. So a lot of good, probably good practices for running efficient competitions to be learned through BCS Classic.
I did want to note, Asian Flavor Punch will be a vendor there. And if you guys have not had Asian Flavor Punch, they were one of our food sponsors for the games, and they're just great people. They're from Tyler, Texas. If you went to a semifinal, you probably had one of their bowls. It was probably that long line
in North America.
In North America, yeah. So they have an amazing story. We're going to talk about that in a future episode about them. But if you're in the area, go check them out. If you ever see them, their teriyaki sauce, they're actually going to bottle that and sell that. So just look.
Of course, you would know that.
Of course. course. That's what's going to be for
You
dinner.
probably have a pre-order to Germany already placed.
Anyways, but I'm not saying anything. But anything else on the BCS Classic? Obviously, the main thing about it's about family, fitness, faith. That's their three cornerstones that they do the competition of, which aligns itself with Mayhem. So yeah.
I think in general, just with all the conversations I've had with Charlie and everyone who's involved there, they have a very clear idea of their identity, and it's visible through their marketing, through their messaging, and through what they've been doing over the last decade and a half.
Hey, I know we didn't bring this up, but this popped up on my feed, and I wanted to kind of bring the attention to this. The Move Fast, Live Heavy Invitational has returned.
Oh,
Glass House, New York City, Saturday, October 5th. If you can see, I mean, it's a pretty cool competition. They had it 2 years ago. I think we were both busy doing something, but yeah, Chris Harris, who founded Move Fast, Live Heavy, looks like they're bringing the invitational back. The past years they had Easy Muhammad, they had Tola, I think they had Kelsey Keel, and it was just a fun exhibition. I think Matty Rogers was there as well. So yeah, something to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, yep, very cool. There's always competitions popping up, returning, etc. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that, especially if you're up in the Northeast, maybe something that's interesting for you.
Yeah. We'll get more details on it. Who knows? Maybe we might be in New York City. I don't know.
Well, actually, I'll be in Utah that weekend.
You're right. Speaking, which is a nice segue. Why are you going to be in Utah?
Yeah, Monday we talked a little bit about what's coming up in terms of our schedule, but we really just took it through the next 3 weeks. So obviously, we have BCS Classic. Then we'll be in Finland. We'll do a full preview for that next week. And then I am going to go to Serbia, even though the Belgrade Games got postponed, to try to learn what I can about CrossFit and fitness community there. See if I can catch up with Luca at all, if he's going to be in town or available for that, and just spend some time with some other people that I know who live in Serbia. And then when we get back, we're going to have a pretty full 4 weeks of North American CrossFit competition. So we'll have Lake Norman Fit Fest here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We'll head out to SoCal for the Tier Cup. Then we'll go to Masters Fitness Championship. And we just confirmed that we will definitely be at Summit Games, which is happening October 4th through 6th. They moved to Salt Lake City, Utah this year. It's an open sign-up, so there's still spots available in all divisions. Programming is Adrian Conway with True Fitness. I've seen all the workouts. The venue is pretty cool. I think did they list the venue there? Oh yeah, there it is. Zebra Center, Zion Banks Real. You see all the divisions there. And yeah, this is Bryson Del Monte signed up in the Elite division, or RX division. Elite is I think what it's called. And I recognize several other names on the list. I just saw the athlete roster for this. But yeah, there's spots available if you're looking for a competition. Brigham runs this, and he's gone full in on it this year. New location, new venue, same programming with Adrian, and tons of opportunities to compete. So we were there last year for what was apparently the last version of the Iron Games, and we'll be here in a new location with a new name for the Summit Games in the beginning of October.
Yeah, I mean, when it was the Iron Games, it was on its way to becoming one of the top mid-tier off-season competitions on the West Coast. I mean, obviously you have like NorCal, would probably be the premier one, but Summit Games, I mean, at the time Iron Games was up there, but again they kind of split away. They wanted to be closer to Salt Lake City, be a lot easier for travel, a lot more venues, closer for, and just bringing more of the athletes out there. So, yeah, I'll have some of the top athletes in Utah, Vegas, Nevada, even California there. So they still have spots available. Like Brigham, he has a ton of competition experience. Brian will be out there helping out, doing a broadcast for them. So it'll be cool.
Saw this comment from Taylor Smith. He's going to be competing male at BCS. Plan on making the podium. Love that. Definitely. If you have any information that you want to share with me, you can send me a message on Instagram or just catch up with me. I'm going to be getting in town tomorrow, and I should be around on site, throughout the whole competition, Friday afternoon and Saturday. I'd love to talk to you guys. So thanks, Taylor, and hopefully meet you there. This, although we didn't cover any competitions this last weekend, there was a competition down in Colombia, the Fitland Fitness Festival, and it's one of the competition that is a feeder to the LatAm Cup at Tier Wadapalooza. It's the second one of those that has happened. There was also the Wadstock Chile in the early July. And I think with SoCal coming up, a majority of Loud and Live's efforts have been pushed towards that, but these events are continuing to happen. The next one will be the Black Challenge in Mexico City at the end of August, beginning of September. And then there are competitions throughout the fall in Ecuador, Guatemala, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, Argentina, and Venezuela that are all feeders into that LatAm Cup. The winners of this competition are actually recognizable athletes. That doesn't mean that they'll necessarily accept their invite, but I hope that they do. Esteban Ospina won for the men. He has been the fittest man in Colombia before. He was 6th this year in the Open, and he was on the WADX team that qualified 3rd out of North America West, but one of their athletes failed the drug test, so that he didn't get to compete at the games this year. He has competed in the South American semifinal as an individual as well. And then another games qualifier from this year on a team, Maria Camila Quintero. She's been either 1st or 2nd fittest in Colombia for the last 6 seasons, I believe. And she was on the AR1 CrossFit Mayhem Unity team that qualified for the games this year. So established competitors for sure, winning this competition, both won by about 50 points. And therefore, should be earning an invite to it at the very least to compete in Wadapalooza in the LatAm Cup, should they choose to accept it.
Yeah. Should we just move on to what probably majority of people want to hear us talk about?
We can, yeah.
Yeah. But before we, one thing I wanted to point out is when we last spoke, how many followers did they have? They had like 39,000.
I think so.
37. It was something like that. It was like 35. I have to go back. But here we are today, and they're at 47,000 followers. And that's just been over 2 days. So PFAA it's getting traction. People now know what the PFAA is about. I think if you follow the sport of CrossFit, you know what they're about. You know who they are.
Yeah. So PFAA is the athletes organization, and obviously, they made a statement last night. Well, I think most people will know that. The statement that's on Instagram is the statement. It's 3. There's opening, a list of 3 demands, a little bit of a closing. There is also
Is it a statement or a list of demands?
Well, the statement at the top of the press release is, in the wake of the death of Lazar Ðukić at the 2024 CrossFit Games, we demand new safety standards and the removal of Dave Castro from the sport team. So that's a statement.
Yeah.
Sure. And then followed by a list of 3 demands. They identify who they are. The PFA represents the interests of athletes competing in the CrossFit Games season. The sport is built on the principle that athletes do not know all the details of the events they participate in, but we always assumed if something went wrong, they would save us. We were wrong. And then it lists off these 3 demands. We demand an appropriate level of transparency between CrossFit and the PFAA regarding their third-party investigation as to the death of Lazar Ðukić and subsequent changes made to protect all athletes going forward.
Okay, stop. Now let's talk about one then. Let's just work down a list. How's that sound?
Yeah. Look, as far as there's a lot to consider when looking at something like this, and I spent a decent amount of time last night reading through comments that people were making on this, trying to see who was reposting it with concerns, who was reposting it in a critical way. in a supportive way. We reposted it as not as a yes or no, whatever, just to repost it so it was available for people to see. And we got a variety of different responses, from people who just said they agree or they disagree or they gave reasons one way or the other. And look, there's a lot of comments in there that are emotional, they're reactive, they're probably not that helpful. There are also a lot of comments in there that I were more along the lines of questions or observations that I thought were quite helpful and good questions and appropriate questions. And if you have any, questions of that nature that you want to drop in the chat there, we can potentially get to those if we don't cover them otherwise. At the surface of this first one, we see a reference to a third-party investigation. And straight off the bat, I mean, I have to say that there's, you have to ask the questions that John Woolley was asking about the investigation. Like, how was this guy chosen? Why was he chosen? The fact that he does have some kind of a association, however deep or shallow that is, with the U.S. Border Patrol, who's a sponsor of the games the last couple of seasons, is definitely relevant. And it raises questions. I mean, anyone who hasn't, just like made an observation about the fact that CrossFit has a big history in terms of a legal department. It may not be as robust as it once was. They have a big backer in terms of the private equity firm that owns them. And they probably would be, interested in having this thing resolved in a specific way. Is, what's going on? Was there some kind of foul play in bringing this guy on? I have no idea.
Yeah, we don't know
what the PFAA is asking for is an appropriate level of transparency, which doesn't really mean anything and is super vague.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think by appropriate level of transparency is like they just want to know. They just want to know. They don't have to know details because obviously when you're going through an investigation and the likelihood of a potential litigation or lawsuit in the horizon, we don't know if that's going to happen or not. I mean, we can only assume something like going to happen. There has to be some type of you can't just, if you're CrossFit, you just can't lay all your cards out there. And because of that, because that just puts them in an awkward situation if they put out too much that, any lawyer will tell them, it's like, they're just going to put out the broadest terms. So that demand of an appropriate level of transparency between CrossFit and the PFA, but they've been asking for that for a while. I mean, just transparency in general, just not regarding this investigation. So this is just a continuation.
And that's a relevant point, because when we get to talking about Dave, this is not, I don't think that this is an insinuation of his culpability in Lazar's death, so much as it's a continued pattern that's been established over a long period of time that's frustrating to members of the PFAA.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that when we get to the third point, because everyone's assuming like this is a lot of people are saying, people are making these demands over, an unfortunate incident, but it wasn't. It's just the crux of something that's been building for a long time. But in terms of point one, the third party investigation as to the death of Lazar, I think it's also they just, they want CrossFit to just put it out there, let people know that these, if CrossFit did the appropriate levels of safety, then put it out there. So that way, they people can just either move on and find someone else to blame, or accept it and continue on with their lives. I think those are the two kind of like parties now. You have people that want people to move on, or people that want someone to be, held responsible for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And people, people want answers, but we have to acknowledge that there are a lot more questions than answers at this point. And I'm starring a bunch of the comments and questions that are coming in. There's some good, stuff.
Some good questions, yeah. Some really good questions. And what we'll do is we're just going to finish going through the next two bullets, and then we'll start pulling those up and answering them, or Brian will, or and then maybe.
So the second point here, I think, is actually the most tenable point of the three demands that they're making, which is we demand CrossFit create an independent safety team to liaise with the PFA on an ongoing basis. This, I think, is the reason why I say it's very tenable is because I think that the people and the protocols are largely already in place and available to be used. The barrier to cross here is just the implementation of that is actually making it happen. But I think that this is a fair demand. I think that it's a reasonable one. I think it's one that should be happening. And I don't think it's that challenging for them to arrive at this. The question is, who is the them that's going to arrive at this? Because if we zoom out from these demands, there's a much bigger picture question, which is, what does the competitive season and earning opportunities look like for competitive athletes in the sport of fitness next year? And that can obviously take many different shapes, and then depending on what governing body is overseeing the season that the athletes choose to participate in, that need to incorporate those people and those protocols and make them available to accommodate this demand.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw a little bit this back at the PFAA, because CrossFit, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, CrossFit always comes up with like organizations or teams, or whether it be the athlete council. They had a DEI council at one point. They've always like built up these like teams or these teams within CrossFit, but then they just kind of disappear and go away because no one holds them accountable for it, or they don't demand it, or those people that are in those positions lose interest. I think that's why when you create an independence team, that's their sole purpose. They don't have a foot in one door versus the other. They're kind of middle of the road, but their job. We in the Army, I'm probably going to refer to the military a lot in this because we call them the military, we call them LNOs, liaisons, and I've held that position. And basically, you're the middleman. You're the guy that in between one entity and the other. But that one person can't be to be a true liaison. You just can't have someone from the organization assigned to you. It should be someone that you assign, and again, independent, that you can get, that you trust, that you can get information from. Because CrossFit's not really good about maintaining something. They'll do something, and we've seen it done in the media, whether it be like, hey, we're going to have press conferences, we're going to make athletes available, we're going to make so we want to make these regular occurrence. They didn't have a single press conference.
Here's our level system.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but like you said, I think this is something very easily attainable. And if I was CrossFit,
well, and with regards to this, there's a good comment here from CrossFit. Will this independent group be made up of the same familiar players but with a different master or name? And then there was someone else was asking about Alyssa is an independent safety team, and they won't work for CrossFit. So those, this question is assuming that CrossFit is still the governing body for the sport. Mm-hmm. I think that there's another potential route that this thing goes down, which is there's a separate entity that's running the competitive season next year. And that if that's the case, that there's an opportunity for that quote unquote independent safety team to exist, and to have a representative who more or less is on a board that's consists of a certain number of people that are making decisions about the season. I do think that there's something like that exists now within the CrossFit Games or HQ team. We just don't really know what it is. When I've spoken with, especially Adrian Bosman during the time that he was in charge of the CrossFit Games, he would always see, oh, that's a good question. Let me take it to the team. And my inference from that is that there's a team of people that he confers with before making decisions, and that depending on what the decisions are in regard to, that may also include a medical expert or a safety expert with regards to competition. It's just not very clear. And then I think that going forward, it would be better for that to be more clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the NFL, a lot of the conversation's been like, oh, why is there a union? Why is this? If you look at any professional sport, golf, tennis, they really don't have like an athlete organization. But they, these point of these athlete organizations, these unions, is to hold the governing body accountable. Now, of course, they've all built up enough power where they can do that, and that these athletes are willing to make their sacrifices to do something. I don't know, and I'm pretty sure there's some questions regarding that. If our athletes in CrossFit are willing to make the sacrifices to make the change, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, be interesting.
The third and final demand is we demand that Dave Castro be removed from his position in the sport team. There's been a little bit of conversation in the chat about firing Dave versus removal from the sport team. I think it's pretty clear, especially if you read the full breadth of what the PFA put out in the Men's Health article, that they're not necessarily asking for Dave to be fired from CrossFit exclusively or, in totality, but they don't want him to be a part of the sport anymore. And this is the one that has created a bunch of divide, and where you see people posting Dave's symbol, you see other people reposting the PFAA's thing. And, I think it was Wad Zombie basically said, there's 2 I stands that have been released, but he's basically saying this is going to create a division in the sport. Like, that's what his satirical post is referencing. And this is where my mind went, which I think as many of you as well, from what I've seen in the comments, went to, is, each of these demands starts with the word we. Who is we? Who is the PFA? What is the PFA? Who do they actually represent? Like, we understand that they represent, quote unquote, the athletes, but what athletes are actually supportive and behind this? Because from what I've been able to see online in the last, however many hours, there's definitely athletes that are reposting this and are in support of this. There's also definitely people who are not in support of this. And then there's a huge group of people, a majority of the athletes that we would consider to be professional athletes in the space, maybe top 200 in the world, top 100 in the world, whatever, who haven't made any points one way or the other. We also have a competition coming up in 2 weeks called the Masters CrossFit Games and the Teenage CrossFit Games. Are those athletes a part of the PFAA? Are there going to be athletes there who sit out from that competition because it has an association with CrossFit? I'm assuming that people who are on CrossFit Games teams are still going to be at those competitions. I'm assuming that Dave was planning to go and probably visit both of those at some point during that weekend. Is he still planning to do that? Would he do it again? If he's not, would he still do that if he's still a part of the sport team? Will he be removed by then? But the broader question is, who is part of the PFAA? And I think that from where I sit, that this is where the PFAA could have done better. Is that I think what's been missing is unity amongst the athletes. It's been missing since the inception of the PFAA, and therefore it diminishes the power that they have with which to negotiate. Whether it's before or after this year's games is irrelevant for what I'm talking about. That if there isn't a collective group of athletes that's known, established, and understand what they're identifying with, if they want to be a part of the PFAA, then it's difficult to stand really strongly on these claims. And we do end up reverting back to what happened 4 years ago, where there's a certain group of people that said, I'm not participating in this for whatever reason. And there's a bunch of other people that said, I can look past that and I want to compete because I love competing and it's my job. And I'm kind of afraid that we're heading down this line where we're going to see some athletes who hold a really fine line and try to make a big, strong statement, and other athletes who don't care as much, and they're going to, just continue to compete and do what they do. And that those two things are going to ultimately diminish the effect that the PFAA has, or whoever's involved with it has. No thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, when I first saw that demand, I was wondering, it was almost like they purposely like put that at the end instead of putting that as the first thing. It's kind of like the first two are kind of like well thought out of statements, and then this last one, just removal of Dave, immediate removal of Dave. And then my personal relationship with Dave is he's someone I don't have like a real personal relationship with him. I mean, like I said, it's more media and Dave Castro. I do think I have maybe a unique point of view on the type of person he is. based on his background, based on people that I know that know him from his previous background, and you know, um, but everyone going up in arms about asking Dave to be removed. Um, Again, this is another reference to the military. I haven't. I've been in 30 years. I've screwed up sometimes in the military. Every time I've screwed up, well, I was removed from that position. It happens all the time, so it shouldn't be a surprise. People say, "Why is he?" Well, something happened on his watch, whether it was his fault or not, whether you had a direct correlation to it or not. It happened on his watch, and that happens a lot in any job. You know, so asking for the removal of Dave is not out of the norm, and it's all. I mean, in my opinion, it should be expected. You know, my argument is, why wouldn't you remove him? And then and everyone knows how much I respect Rich, but Rich made a comment. It's like, what was his comment about? You know, there's no one that loves CrossFit more than Dave Castro. No one's arguing that. CrossFit Games. No one's arguing that. He started the CrossFit. There'd be no CrossFit Games without Dave Castro. Just like there would be no CrossFit without Greg Glassman. But just because you love something and you started or you think you're the best doesn't, shouldn't blind you from what actually happened. That's not a good indication if you're qualified to do the position because you love it more than anything else.
Yeah, and people. These were some of the comments that I saw online that I thought made some sense.
Yeah.
People asking these questions: why? What? Just because he loves the sport, does that mean that he's qualified to run it? Well, what is this? Asking for his removal is not out of normal, but the demand could have been made better along with substantial supporting facts. There are other things that are a little bit unfortunate, which is, there's definitely an account of what happened at the CrossFit Games from Lazar Ðukić that's not publicly available yet. I think that a lot of people will want to see what he has to say, and then that may be helpful in terms of making a decision. I think there's going to have to be some kind of statements from CrossFit that has more than just saying this happened on our watch, that says what did happen. But they're not going to do that until an investigation comes through, and we know that investigation can take 4 to 6 weeks. And my guess is the PFAA wasn't really willing to wait 4 to 6 weeks for that to happen. They want to get things moving. They want to, because they want to ultimately do what we said earlier, which is get back to competing. That's part of their job. It's their profession. It's what they've been training and preparing for several years to have the opportunity to do. There are competitions coming up. And then there's going to be, the start of next season. And I think that already I know that there are athletes that they're thinking 1 and 2 and 3 years ahead, and their aspirations ultimately, if you stripped it down, would be to find a way to qualify for and compete at the semifinals in the CrossFit Games. Like, that is still the goal for most athletes who are pursuing this at that level. But right now, at this time of the year, usually we have some idea, but not a perfect picture of what the next game season is going to look like. I think that there are a lot of people that would like that to change. They'd like to have a consistent season that's understood. Last week, the PDGA, Professional Disc Golf Association, sent out to all their members the entire season for next year. And that's kind of a consistent thing that they do. They send it out in August for a season that starts in February. I would love for whatever this thing is called or looks like, the professional fitness season, to get to the point where we have something like that too, where it's understood that 6 months before it starts, the season's going to be advertised. And then, because people will schedule their whole training, their whole competition season around that, if that's what their goal is. Right now, no one can really do that. And that's part of the, part of the reason why I think the PFAA took some initiative to start making this, or to make a statement or a demand quickly, is because they want to, get back into a competitive season. And if this gets dragged out much further, then I think it's just going to give more and more opportunity for less and less change. And I will reiterate what I said earlier: is I think that what happened this year at the CrossFit Games was the culmination of frustration over a long period of time from a lot of different people. This is not a new thing that there's a group of people that are frustrated with Dave Castro. I think someone reposted this week something of Justin Kotler talking about it last year when he was reappointed. There were people asking questions then. I know that there were people asking questions of Don privately before that happened. Are you sure that if he comes back, it's going to be different? It's going to be better, that he's grown, whatever, that he can reintegrate. So it's not, it's not new that there was this divide, that there were people that are frustrated and concerned about Dave leading, and that there's a group of people that feel that he is and always has been and always probably will be the best thing for the sport. And, with the way that this is going right now, it seems likely to me that we're going to see two different groups of athletes next year in terms of the choices that they make.
Yeah. To kind of finish up on it, these demands reflect the immediate steps necessary to begin to restore athlete trust in CrossFit sport. The PFAA is also acutely aware that more must be done to change the culture and strategic direction of the sport to ensure its future, and that will take time. Signed the PFAA board, including Annie Thorisdottir, Brent Fikowski, Dina Swift, Fee Sagafi, Laverne Engelbrecht, Patrick Vellner, Royce Dunn, and Victoria Campos. So that's how the statement ends. And everyone's asking, kind of like how CrossFit's asking for a level of transparency, or the PFAA is asking for a level of transparency from CrossFit. Everyone has the right to demand the same level of transparency from the PFAA when it calls for their demands to remove Dave. But unlike CrossFit, I think the PFAA, I don't know for sure, I think the PFAA will, in due time, start making those. This is my assumption. They put that out there. They showed their hand. They want to see what HQ does. If HQ doesn't remove Dave, soon, then they'll start maybe showing their hand on other things. Like, this has been a pattern of negligence when it comes to safety when Dave Castro's involved. They might start leaking that. I don't know. I'm just assuming that it is. Like Brian said, referred to, there is a bit of a trail, whether you want to talk about, Murph in 2014 or, 2015 Murph as well, or the Lake Monona in Madison, anything like that. And there's other instances. I mean, I've heard other people talk about the 2017 tricep, or no, 2018, what was it? Was it the triceps or the tricep tear?
The pecs.
The pec tear. Pec.
I didn't know what you're talking about for a second.
Sorry, I'm talking about the pecs. Sorry.
No, look, there are a ton of accounts out there of people who have had, questionable run experiences with him at the helm of the sport. They're not just athletes, they're coaches, they're volunteers, they're medical personnel. A lot of those are available on Instagram. There's articles that have been written about them. And then there's a lot of other private accounts that, people are aware of that could, and this is what I was saying earlier, that all end up painting a picture about his character and the culture that he created at the CrossFit Games over a long period of time. This is the worst expression of it, and people are using it as an opportunity, I think, to voice more vocally their frustrations that have been pent up inside them for a long time. In general, in life, what happens if you're frustrated with an individual or a situation and you don't address it is that it gets to a boiling point and then you explode. And when you finally do make your stance or point of view known on the matter, it comes out in a less than optimal way. And so, those that have been sitting on all this stuff and holding it in are now letting it out. And it may sound very aggressive, and it may sound inappropriately aggressive relative to what's happening in the immediate. But if you think about the fact that they've been frustrated by this for 5 to 10 years, it makes a little bit more sense. There are also people that did bring to light and have been bringing to light these concerns and frustrations, back then and over a long period of time. Like in some ways, this is the reason why the IF3 was born, is because Gretchen Kittelberger had experiences at the CrossFit Games. Then she was frustrated with them, and she thought that there were better ways to do it. And she's been pursuing that since 2015, almost a decade that she's been doing that. And she's making some headway in certain regards, but it has no momentum relative to the CrossFit Games. on the global scale for the same reasons that we always say, which is kind of that McDonald's idea that there's a name, the fittest on earth, forging elite fitness, unknown and unknowable, the CrossFit Games. Like those are the words, those are the key words, those are what people want to pursue. And there was a question, there were some questions in here about something like this. Would it be easier to have a professional, competent, existing competition expand their testing rather than that? And others along this lines, where is this one? Lynn, the CFHQ needs a culture change in science that happens when people are fired and new blood. But no, not this one. This one. Why not just remove the sport department from CrossFit? Primarily let CrossFit focus on affiliates and training and have the sport exist independently. So this is a great question and something that's been asked for many, many years as well. And then the question would be, does that separate thing that's not part of the affiliate and training side of CrossFit get to exist as the CrossFit Games, owned and operated or ran by something that's not CrossFit HQ? Because if it does, then it can maintain all of those powerful elements of the branding but operate as kind of a separate business with separate leadership. If it is allowed to separate, but it can't maintain the trademarks of CrossFit Games, fittest on earth, etc., then I'm not sure how much momentum it will necessarily gain. And that's where potentially leaning into pre-existing competitions that athletes recognize as, at the very least, being organized, safe, and good earning potential, having some of those step in to fill that void or to run that season may make some sense.
And I it does make sense, but I also think, you have to look at those competitions and they're not looking for the fittest. In reality, Rogue is basically a weekend where they get all the content they need for the whole year for their products, whether it be strongman, CrossFit, whatever. For Wodapalooza, it's that one time now twice a year where they can bring all these brands together and celebrate not just the sport, but celebrate the brands that support the sport, that make it possible for these athletes. It gives those athletes an opportunity to earn an additional paycheck outside of, because athletes outside of the games, they don't make that much money, but they have certain, the sponsored athletes, they have certain things they have to do to maintain that level of partnership and sponsorship. So, making those, they tried doing that with the sanctionals, trying to make those events part of the season, part of the CrossFit Games season. I thought it was done. I liked the idea, but at the same time, I thought it just didn't. It didn't. Well,
unfortunately, we never really got to see it play out. Exactly. That was a big change of the season, and I would say that, if COVID hadn't happened, that you would probably want to see what 3 years looks like, and by the end of the third year, we would have had a good grasp of whether that was a sustainable model or not in the long run. Unfortunately, it got cut short after a year and a half, and we never returned to it. So to me, that still is kind of an unknown. I do think that from the athlete side, that it was actually a pretty successful model for the reasons of having multiple opportunities to qualify should you just get sick, injured, etc., during the critical time of the season, which would be the semifinals for potential games athletes. And also when you actually go back and look at the rosters of athletes who were competing at some of these, then even though that was in the 2018, 19, 19, 20 time period, many of those athletes have since risen the ranks and are now making it to the games or getting close. And so you can see some of the origins of that.
Yeah, Danny Spiegel. She did like 7 sanctionals one year. Jacqueline Dahlstrom was one of a few people that won 2 sanctionals. Now these are athletes through the sport. Let's start answering some of these questions, people. That we'll save that one for last. Questions: what leverage does the PFAA have, if any? What have the athletes in general done for CrossFit other than going to CrossFit competitions to get the prize money?
The question about the leverage of the PFAA, I think, has showed up a few times in here, and that is the big question, because there was someone that said this: if they're not worried, why didn't they stop competing? If they are that worried, why didn't they stop competing? If they've had these concerns for years, why are they still competing? What I'm more or less is saying is there are athletes who have left the sport and who have tried to do other things and have taken some initiative in this regard, it's just very few. A majority of them, despite being frustrated with it, have continued to compete. And Andrew, Stan, your point here is well taken, that like, hey, you guys had an opportunity to make statements in the past and you haven't. And we understand that now something more serious has happened and you're doing it now. But, you know, why haven't you taken a stronger stance earlier? And I think that probably most of them would say because we don't really have another option. We have, you know, this is still the best option, even though it's not one that we're impressed with. But the fact that the IF3 was created, the fact that the PFAA was created, we have these accounts of things, and some of them are public and some of them may not be public, but there are plenty of historical records of people trying to ask these questions and then being reprimanded, shunned, exiled, removed, treated differently when they've done that. And though that pattern of behavior of like, well, every time that we have tried to make, whether it's a medical person, a volunteer, a judge, an athlete, a coach, a training camp, whomever, that they get a consistent response or a consistent feeling response, I think that that is the momentum that is ultimately leading to this demand of his removal. And there was a question here about if we should remove Dave, why shouldn't we just remove everybody? And I think that that's a valid question. The thought, from what I understand, is that his existence as part of the team creates a specific culture. And I have heard accounts from people who were a part of integral roles at the games with Dave, then with Boz, and then with Dave again, who said, yeah, have said, yes, it's a notable difference in terms of the environment, the efficiency in which things are handled, the opportunity for people to express their opinions when Boz was in control of that compared to when Dave was. And that's kind of what I think that they're. I don't know the answer to that. If you get rid of Dave, will the culture change enough for it to satisfy the athletes and their demands and their continued demands, or is it really needed a full cleaning of house and new people in? Because a lot of those people have been there for a very long time, which can be good, but it can also be bad.
Yeah. Well, I look at it in sports. Whenever you bring a new athletic director, he usually cleans house. Not just coaches or whatever. They have guaranteed contracts, stuff like that. They want to bring in their people and stuff like that. Don never had that. When Don came in, he was pretty much forced to hire Dave back. We don't know the dynamics of their relationship. They seem like they got along, but oftentimes it seemed like Dave probably had more. I mean, if you asked anyone who was in charge of CrossFit, more people would say Dave over Don. Don was more of the business side, the CEO, and Dave was more of the figurehead, but also had the sport. I kind of think of. I mean, I'm probably going to use the UFC analogy a couple times. The UFC, the athletes try to band together, and you brought up the example like being shunned. A lot of those UFC fighters that try to unionize, Dana White said, "You're never coming back. You're not going to ever fight for this organization because I'm treating you guys fine. I'm doing everything that I think is right instead of listening to the athletes." But it's interesting. I did want to answer. There was a second part of that question. I think you might have gotten rid of it. Yeah, but basically it was like I forgot. It was what have the athletes done for CrossFit was the second part of that. And the answer to that is the CrossFit. The athletes have done. I mean, if you look at the roots of the CrossFit Games, other than going to CrossFit to get their prize money, and we pointed this out, and this is something that I'm doing research on now. Is a lot of these athletes, believe it or not, are a part of their communities. They're L1s, they're L2s. This year's class of athletes actually had more L1s and L2s than last year. Where last year, I think it was roughly 28%, 29% of the athletes that competed last year had their L1 or L2. They're promoting the sport. That's what they do for CrossFit. Not just promoting sport, but they're promoting CrossFit. That's what they're doing. I mean, we go back to the heyday when we had Annie Thorisdottir, Dan Bailey, Rich Froning, the list goes on and on. Spieler, Matt Chan, they're all red shirts. They're part of the seminar staff. We don't have an athlete now that's a part of seminar staff, but I think eventually it might be. I was thinking in my mind at some point Jeff Adler was going to become seminar staff at some point. I mean, hell, his coach, his partner, she lives a CrossFit methodology. Jeff lives the CrossFit methodology. So those are your two people. When it comes to CrossFit, you have the strongest man and his coach, who's an L4, and they were the first one of the first people to step away and said, we're not competing this weekend. So something's not right when you have people that are so ingrained in CrossFit and its culture, and immediately they stepped away.
What other questions do you want to, should we get to?
I have a question. Why do you think the PFAA is calling for Castro to be removed, not more members? That was like saying that this is Castro's fault alone, and I do not agree with that. I think Brian hit on that. You want to kind of wrap it up again, or?
Well, yeah, and I will also kind of roll it in with this one from Rational Reflections Network. Dave had control over the event. I believe that in this case, he's referring specifically to the run swimming event. Yeah. If he couldn't run it safely, he should have changed the event. I'm going to kind of summarize some conversations that I've had and some thoughts that I've been having about this particular event, because I have heard, and all of these things are unsubstantiated, they're not confirmed, but I've heard that there were different protocols and groups, entities used for this offsite event compared to ones that were used in previous offsite events at the games. If that's the case, then it leads to a question of why. If you have used whatever in the past, whomever in the past, why wouldn't you use it for this one? And the suggestion has been, as it is for many things this year with CrossFit, is financial reasons. So let's just imagine a situation where, Dave and his team say, okay, we want to run this offsite event. We know that if we're going to run an event that involves a long run and a long swim, that we need this, and this, and this, and it's going to cost us X number of dollars. And if they look at the budget and they're like, wow, well, that's like half X that we have available for this event, then you could say, well, that's on the executive team. That's on the people who are demanding budget cuts. Like, they need to provide enough money for Dave and his team to run this event safely. Or you could look at it the other way and say, okay, well, if Dave knows that he needs X amount of money to run a safe event, including a long distance swim, and he only has half X, does he need to do the long distance swim? Could he do that event differently, considering that there's a new variables in play? He can't use the same people that he'd want to use in the past because they're just too expensive, or whatever those situations are. And so that's where I would say, we're all, the problem is we're all speaking in hypotheticals. We don't have all of this information. And so it's hard to really approximate where the blame falls or what should have been done differently. I think everyone can agree that something wasn't right about this. It seems like it was more dangerous than wasn't intended, and not just from what happened with Lazar, but from all the different accounts that we have. And how much did Dave and the competition team know about that? What was available to them? And did they really make the best decisions with the information that they had? That's what everyone's hoping to find out at the end of this independent investigation. My general feeling is that we're probably going to end up getting less information than we want.
If CrossFit can say, okay, CrossFit can Dave, is it a sacrificial lamb, or is it a real change to follow?
Well, so this is the other thing that I've heard. These are through conversations with people who I would say they have some experience in either the legal realm or with medical and safety concerns from outside experiences, that in a situation like this, first of all, you have to start with the legal. Like right now, there's no investigation going on from the Fort Worth Police Department or Fire Department. And therefore, my assumption is that, even though it's not publicly stated, is that the cause of death was found to be accidental drowning, which means that there's no criminal investigation. There's no incidental manslaughter, pre-existing conditions, the negligence with regards to that, or whatever that were discovered. And therefore, there's not going to be a criminal investigation. There still could be potentially a civil investigation. And when you're looking at that, now you're basically asking about culpability or who's to blame. Although it's likely that there's a lot of different things that could have happened to prevent this from happening. And there's several different people potentially that could be pointed at along the lines of not making the best decision. I think that usually in these cases, what he's suggesting, a sacrificial lamb or a fall guy, is the term that I've heard, that is a possibility, is that one person takes the brunt of this so that everyone else doesn't have to feel the burden. And, Nobody knows what Dave is thinking, by the way. I'm under the
Yeah.
impression that this has affected him greatly, that he is, you know, despite the fact that he has this cold demeanor through his training in the military, that he is actually a loving, caring, personable human. He's a father, he's a husband, you know, he's got a lot of friends, and he feels things. I've heard different accounts of how he was emotionally during the games. But he may also have really strong feelings about the people on his team, and ultimately he may just decide in the best interest of protecting all of them to take this on himself anyway. So it's a good question, but it's just so many unknowns at this point, that it's hard to say. The second part of that is, will it change anything? I think what I mentioned earlier about, I do have firsthand accounts, I guess it's secondhand accounts because it's not my account, from people who've been in the quote unquote war room with Boz at the helm compared to Dave, and said those meetings do feel differently.
Yeah, it's different culture.
So yes, there is that potential, and this is for sure true. It has affected Boz greatly as well. You know, Boz, I don't think Boz has that same kind of a cold military training demeanor as Dave. He presents himself very professionally and organized in most of the public facing roles that we see. But yeah, he's definitely an emotional person as well. And I don't think that it's, you know, we can make these demands, we can make these statements, we can say, you know, speculate all we want to, but I think it's always good to keep in mind that we're talking about humans. Nobody who is involved in that is feeling good about the fact that Lazar died on their watch. Everyone is hurting from that. It doesn't mean also that it's not appropriate to ask, well, whose fault was this? What could have been done differently? And especially from the perspective of making sure that we do those things better in the future.
Yeah. All athletes agreed once from the games or also semifinals. How many or how is the PFA put together?
Yeah, and this is the biggest question that I have. The one that I asked earlier is, you know, what and who is the PFAA? And I think that from my perspective, that's the question that they need to answer, not just amongst themselves, but also publicly. Because right now, I don't know for sure. Let's just say that there's 100 athletes who we would recognize their names that are also in agreement with the statement and demands that were made yesterday. But if 4 months from now, Dave's still there and the open signups are rolling around, are all 100 of those athletes going to pass on the 2025 game season, or will some of them sign up? So like, there is no real answer to that question, which I think is the biggest problem that the PFAA currently has.
It's just so confusing to not know the facts. But what do we deserve, or what right do we have to ask for the facts?
Well, I think there's this. I think that there's like, and this is somewhat of a personal thing for me because I have had the chance to talk to Luka. I think that what he has to say is relevant. And I think that for the most part, I wish that that more people knew what he had to say, because I think that it would be a very valuable piece of information that was added. I also think that we will learn some things through the investigation that will help to round out people's perspective on this. The unfortunate reality is that because of actions that have happened since then, people are being forced to make a decision, and very much like the athletes were forced to make a decision without having all the information. And I think that there are people that would be making different decisions and be saying different things if they did know everything that was available to know, which for the large part is why it's probably better not to say anything for the time being and to wait and see. You know, we are spending some time talking about it, but I hope that we're doing that in the light of just kind of observing and making observation about what has been going on historically and in recent time, and suggesting that, yeah, things are murky right now and not clear. We're going to find out more information at some point. And in the meantime, you know, the PFA has made this, like you said, they put their cards on the table. Like they've put the wheels in motion, and now people do have to react to that.
Yeah. I mean, they do. I mean, you know, it's not that CrossFit was already scrambling after the games. And you know how you know that? Look at the silence they've had since then on everything, platforms outside of Don making that video that he sent out to athletes. The media has been totally silent. Instagram, YouTube. It's been totally silent, which is a shame because CrossFit is bigger. CrossFit is much more than a sport, so the media shouldn't have stopped on that. So that just tells me right now that there's a lot of questions, just a lot of things going on right now, and people are running around confused, or maybe there's no leadership, or there's too many people trying to assume leadership. Because we know that Don's a CEO, but after that, it just seems like there's so many other different levels of leadership. And you would think that marketing answers the branding, but does that mean the CMO answers to Nicole Carroll, or are they on a separate plane? Are they there's just so many different leaderships and different jobs there. I don't know. I just don't think collectively they're together. And I think they're scrambling, and that's why you're seeing nothing from them.
Could also be just legal counsel.
Yeah, but still, you still go along with business. You still,
Sure.
you can still, they were after Greg Glassman left and was bought out. They still went on with stuff, and that had legal ramifications as well. But it's just like, you still have a community of over, 500,000 people that follow the CrossFit methodology. Talk to them. Why are we the ones talking to them? Why is Sevon? Why is John Woolley? Or, why is Talking Elite Fitness? That's the reason why people are coming to us, because they're not getting answers. And we don't have the answers. All we have is speculation. And I know that pisses people off when just kind of everything's done in broad, speculative, thoughts, or just bringing up stuff. But that's all we have. So, this is actually a good point here. I thought that. Why do you think Dave came?
Basically, why did they ask for Dave's removal after the games rather than immediately?
Yeah.
I think that the likely answer to this is just time. Like, the athletes, they didn't know what to do Thursday in that meeting, Friday morning. And that's why you saw some of them that were like trickling out their decisions to continue or not. There was athletes who competed on Friday morning and looked like they were half into it, but by Saturday they looked like they were fully into it. There were others that put their best foot forward on Friday, but by Thursday they were just emotionally drained and withdrew. Maybe they got different information by then, maybe not. And then for a lot of the athletes, I think they ultimately made this decision. Okay, they're continuing on with the competition. If I'm going to continue on with the competition, I need to do my best to not think about that until after it's over. And then I will take some time to deal with my emotions, answer to my own questions, and make some movements. But everything happened so quickly that, and there were certainly people that were, the rumor was going around that day. Wow, are Dave and Don both going to get fired today? I heard someone ask that question. That's a good question. We'd have to probably ask some of the athletes, but that's my best speculation.
I lost the question, but I forgot who said it, but it was basically the PFAA is asking for Dave to be removed from the games. They're not asking CrossFit to fire him.
Yeah, we mentioned that earlier, but yes, that's a good distinction to make.
Yeah, and I think that's what everyone thinks, that the PFAA is this cold entity, is like fire the guy. No, they're not. They're asking for his removal from being associated with the games, which is not uncommon for Dave. When he first, he was brought on as a special advisor. He was in charge of training, and he started off in training, So I don't know, but I do believe if Dave does leave, it'll be because it'll either be on his own accord or he gets fired. Obviously, those are probably the only two ways he would leave anyway. But I don't think he would step away from the games. I think he would just leave.
Oh, you mean he would just leave CrossFit altogether?
Yeah. My dream is to eventually be able to watch a well-covered version of the sport without knowing the names of its administrators and without worrying about if it's profitable enough to grow and survive.
Whew. Yeah, this is to some extent a summarization of the things that Patrick and I have been expressing for the last year. Since we've been out on the road, it's like we, unfortunately, as a group of people in this space, like we're spending most of our time talking about these things, and that's been the case consistently. even today. Like the point of the show is to talk about the BCS Classic that we're doing this weekend. We spent a few minutes on that, and now we've spent, I don't know how long on this. But there's so much just turmoil and problems with the organization of the sport, and those things continuously keep cycling to the top and takes away from the athletes' performances and the, for the most part, well-run competitions that we're covering on a nearly weekly basis at this point. So, CJ, we agree.
Yeah, I have same dream. Our buddy Jeffrey, maybe it's none of our business. Why do we need to be privy to the information?
Yeah, I mean, I think he put this comment while I was talking about the fact that there's a lot of unknown information. And so I would say this, yeah, maybe there's some private stuff that's going on there. What I have seen is that there's a lot of people making accusations one way or the other, and that they're doing it with a lack of information. So if you're a person who can just kind of accept that this was a terrible thing that happened, mourn, grieve, and move on in your own way, then yeah, let it all go and get on with your life. But if you're a person who is feeling compelled to express a really strong opinion one way or the other, then I'm just kind of saying it's okay to have strong feelings and opinions about some things, but there's definitely information that most people don't know yet. There may be information that really nobody knows yet, and that those strong opinions may become more clear for those people once they have that information.
Do athletes pay into dues for PFAA? To my knowledge, no.
No, but I think that is something that could potentially happen in the future. And I think if that happens, that it should not be limited to the quote unquote professional athletes, but as in other organizations like USA Weightlifting, disc golf, tennis, etc., that even recreational athletes like us could be able to pay a dues to be a part of that administration, which one gives them some funding to do some stuff with, like a base financially, and it also would give me, I mean, one of the things that they, in the expanded press release that they did, is they identify their board, and they basically say these were elected officials: Brent Fikowski, Grace Paulus, Mitch Bragg, president, COO, and chief growth officer. Well, who voted on those people to be on that board? Right now, because I'm a paying member of the PDGA, I actually get a vote in the board members for the PDGA for the following season. And as part of the PFAA, if the same people who would pay for the Open would pay for that, you'd have a couple 100,000 people paying in. You'd have a couple 100,000 people with an opportunity to vote on the representatives on that committee. And we would know through that membership system the answer to the question that we've been asking all along here, which is, who is the PFAA? Who do they actually represent when they make these demands? So this is a great question. I also think that it's a great opportunity potentially for the PFAA to get some money into their organization, to be able to do some of the things that they want to do or are ready to do, but don't have the financial means to, and also to help to answer that question of who is the PFAA.
Yeah. According to Fikowski's post last week in 2023-24, PFA asked CF for CrossFit for more information on events, and we're told CrossFit isn't releasing more information at this time. I think that was an answer to the question.
Yeah, and I think there's even been public accounts of this where they've kind of, PFAA has published and shown, hey, we asked for this, and this is what they gave us. We asked for this, and we were told there's no more information about that. So you could do your homework and dig back into the history and see some of those things actually materializing over time. I would say that's a legitimate claim that he's making.
Are you willing to hear more, or are you waiting to hear more before you divulge your conversation with Luca?
Yeah, he basically told me that he was telling me that in private. The only reason that I even mentioned that I have the conversation is because that's people are upset or frustrated or confused about why I left the games, and that's was a critical piece of information or a conversation that I had that I know that not everybody else had, and I think that for those who are wondering that, they can understand. Oh, well, Bryan knew some stuff. Luca didn't want him to tell everyone. He's respecting Luca's wishes on that. That information will come out from Luca eventually, I hope. And at that point, I don't think I'll have to divulge anything because Luca will have shared it with you guys too.
Yeah. from Helson. Hey, thank you, Brian, for your sobriety on this. I know it must be hard for you to speak calmly on this subject, knowing that you were good friends with Lazar.
Well, I appreciate that. I think this comment is in light of what I was saying about Dave and Boz and everybody else who is involved with this too. Is like we're all people. We're all feeling things with regards to this. And what I had said on Monday's show is personally leaving the games, going to put myself around friends and family, and being in an environment where I could appropriately reflect on this, I hope has put me into a mindset where I can speak about it publicly in a rational manner. You know, there are like I do have opinions about these things, but there's things that there's just too much that I don't know to say definitively if Dave is a problem or not, and if removing Dave will solve the problem or not. I do think that there's an element of time that everyone is dealing with here, and that there's an element of change that is needed. To what extent, I'm not entirely sure yet, though. But I appreciate this empathetic comment, Helson.
Our buddy Tristan Patrick. Incredibly poor timing for the PFAA to sound the war horn prior to the investigation being finished.
Yes and no. I mean, my assumption here is that they didn't want to wait 2 months potentially before getting things moving. As we showed at the start of the show, there's clearly a growing interest in the PFAA. And I do think that it's a little bit, overdue for them to have the relative respect of the community, or at least the attention of the community. A lot of the stuff that they've been doing over the last couple of years has received very little kind of fanfare or interest. Now it's getting a lot. Was this the best decision and the best timing? I'm not sure. But I am not that surprised actually that they didn't wait. I am a little bit more surprised that there wasn't a clear establishing of who's making statements like this, because if half of the games athletes sign up for the season next year and half of them don't, where does that leave us?
Yeah, true. A couple more. Jenny Smith, did Luka make the decision with Dave for the games to continue before he had more information? If you cannot answer, I understand.
Yeah. More information. Well, I mean, the conversation between Luka and Dave took place Lazar was technically pronounced dead at 10:24 a.m. that day, and the meeting took place at 4 or 5 p.m. local time. It started so this is allowing a maximum of 6 hours of time to transpire between the pronounced death and the start of that meeting. So, what information? They obviously had very limited information at that time. I think that the first part of this statement, how the decision or what the conversation looked like between Dave and Luka, is what people still don't have really good information about.
Do you think the investigation will bring to light the problems that CrossFit HQ has in general?
CrossFit HQs, the general problems will, I don't even know what that's referring to for sure, but if it's, it could be referring to big picture problems that are outside of the scope of the sport. It may be referring to some of these kind of suggested cultural problems that exist specifically within the games team. I think the latter is more likely to be better understood than the former.
If the safety issues were because of cost cutting, that to me indicates CrossFit was already in trouble. Small crowds at American qualifying events was a sign of that waning interest.
Potentially, yes.
Good. Yeah. I will say something. A lot of people have been kind of saying, Don is on record saying that, he limited the budget. Well, limiting the budget doesn't mean you put the blame on him for the safety issues if there are seen any faults in safety, because a lot of the people that come in are volunteers, so they're not getting paid anyways. They do it for the love of the sport, but that's also the responsibility of someone. If my boss gives me a budget and say make it work, you need to make this project work. Yeah, you're gonna have to make it work. But that's on you. It's really on you, not on the boss. he's constrained by money, so that constraint comes down to you. So you don't. One thing you do not do is you don't skirt on safety, which I don't know if Dave did that or not. No one, or if Dave's even involved in that process. But to assume that Don said that he was taking away, he was cutting some of the funding for the games, doesn't mean that he was cutting directly from safety measures. So just think about that before you start making like those assumptions, because it's not really, it's you know it's whoever's in charge of what that project is that actually has to make those tough decisions based on what he has.
Yeah,
I think
and
that
I mean, there's a ton of different nuance to that question, and um, I really don't know how much we're going to ever get in terms of answers to that.
a lot of these are just repeating questions. Jeffrey, we hold the responsibility. Yeah, yeah.
I guess I'll just summarize this conversation.
Unless it's not true. Yeah, but we don't know that. We will, and maybe if they ever come out with, if they just disclose some of the investigation, we'll know. But until then, that's just a theory, but we don't know for sure. Go ahead, Brian. You said you wanted to wrap it up here.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a pretty thorough discussion about it. I think hopefully it's kind of addressed things from a variety of different perspectives and angles. But there seems to be two kind of overriding principles emerging from this. One is, the PFAA or the athletes in general want to have a stronger voice, but from where I'm sitting, they haven't unified well enough up to this point, or even at this point, to really have the influence that they want to have. So if I was speaking to the athletes, I would say, hey, I don't know what that looks like, but you guys need to come together. Otherwise, you're never going to have the influence, no matter what the governing body of the sport is that you want to have. And I think it's reasonable for them to want to have that voice, but it's unreasonable for them to want to have that when they're still divided and, on so many different issues. That's the athlete side. On the other side, when it comes to this third demand about Dave, whatever, I think that really what needs to be examined here is the culture that has been created with the team that's in charge of the CrossFit Games an appropriate culture for running this sport. And this is a big conversation. It's not a new conversation. It's an old, deep-rooted conversation. And unfortunately, there's a massive divide on that, as we identified earlier, where there's a strong contingent of people who feel one way and a strong contingent of people who feel the other way. I'm not really sure where that's going to leave us 6 months from now. But the fact that it's not new is what I think needs to be recognized, is that there are people who have been frustrated by this to the point of walking away or leaving, and people on the other side who've been frustrating with people questioning them, who have dismissed and removed entities from the sport. So this is not a new problem, which leads me to feel that it's not that healthy of a culture in general, the way that the sport has been run. If it was, I don't think that that we would be hearing so many different accounts in that regard. Yeah, so those are the two big picture items that I see on the table. And unfortunately, at this point, there's not a great answer for either of them.
Well said, Brian. Last question, though. I wanted to kind of go out like this. Does Brian know anything about the strike movement lifter rumors?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, I feel like we always do not the best job of acknowledging our sponsors at the start of the show, but Strike Movement has joined as a supporter of our podcast, along with HDR CBD, who's been supporting us throughout this entire season from our podcasting perspective. And Strike Movement was also a big partner of ours at the games. They were a partner of ours at Wodapalooza last year. And the answer to that question is maybe. With his smile. But yes, a lot of the opportunities that we do have as a company are thanks to support from both Strike Movement and HGR. And we would encourage you guys to check both of them out. The Haze Trainer has been the only shoe that I've worn for the last 2 years. And HGR products are something that are definitely a part of my routine whenever I'm home, and a lot of times as well when I'm on the road.
finally, I want to end the show kind of like how we started it, by honoring Lazar. You know, if you notice, again, the GoFundMe is over $500,000. So if you feel inclined, please, it's not cheap to grieve, especially it's not cheap for them to bring his body from Texas to Serbia. So he he supported many people through his exploits, and that's kind of taken away from him now. But yeah, the GoFundMe's still there, and then also I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up also that Mayhem has theirs. If there are some people who don't like using GoFundMe because GoFundMe takes a percentage of them, the percentage of what's donated, I forgot what it is, but Mayhem Mission, they're given 100%. There's no fees. You're given 100% of what what's donated to them to Lazar's family as well. So those are the two major things out there. Those are the two official ones I know of. If you see anything out there, I haven't heard of anything, but there might be. Whenever there's something like disaster like this, you'll see people trying to take advantage of people and their giving and being weak-minded. So just stick to those two. And if you hear anything out there, let us know. Maybe we'll look into it and we'll report if it's false or fake or anything like that. But
and if you missed the start of the show, today is the funeral in Temerin, Serbia. And so we took a moment of silence at the start of the show. But if you want to, during the course of your day today, just take a minute or a second and send some positive thoughts and prayers in direction of those that are there in Serbia and are continuing to deal with and grieve with the loss of a brother, a son, a friend, and a leader in their community.
Yeah, and Lynn brought up Go Rug. I ordered one myself. I ordered one. I know we ordered some shirts from Perform Athletics as well. So yeah, thanks everyone. Hopefully, like I said, we answered some questions. Maybe we brought up more questions. I mean, we don't have the answers. We never really claimed to go into this. We you came on just probably to hear our thoughts from two people who are that greatly care about the sport, the community, the people, everyone involved in CrossFit. CrossFit's deeply changed both our lives and for the better, and we hope it continues to do that. And the only way it does that is if we all kumbaya, get together and just keep this thing going. So thank you everyone for joining us. Next show possibly Friday.
We'll be on the lookout. We may have a really fun and cool show on Friday morning before the BCS Classic. So if that does end up happening, I think you guys will want to see and be a part of that one. And then starting Friday afternoon and all day Saturday, I'll be down in College Station, Texas, streaming the BCS Classic.
Yeah. So keep an eye out, keep an ear out. Again, like, subscribe, get alerts, because obviously now that we're kind of getting back into it, we'll start doing a couple more of these. As athletes, we've reached out to some athletes, coaches, people in the community. We'll start bringing them on, telling their stories, whether it involves this or not. So appreciate everyone showing up. It's evening for me. It's afternoon for you, but it doesn't matter where you are. Just remember to be friendly, our friends.